Okay, so it's 12 now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's e-learning network webinar, Learning to Transform, Bringing People with You in Times of Change. Our presenter is Olivia Lory-Kay from Brightwave. Brightwave are based in Brighton and offer services as a leading agency for next generation products and services. They've been shortlisted this year for best use of blended learning, public and nonprofit sector. Olivia is a senior consultant from Brightwave. She holds an MPhil in Communications, Art and Design from the Royal College of Art. And she's worked extensively in the film industry as a writer, director, and film producer. And she, more importantly to this presentation, is a person who's done a lot of research and thinking about digital transformation and change management. So we should have a lot to look forward to. Now, a few words from the e-learning network. We at the ELN, as the strapline says, are the go-to community for e-learning. In an industry filled with hype and fluff, we offer support and guidance that is rock solid from a community of great practitioners who are out there doing great work. I'm personally really happy to be a part of the ELN. And we offer mentorship for our members and training events through the year. One of the most important of which is ELN Connect, our yearly conference. This year's ELN theme is creating a culture of curious learners. And our keynote speakers will be Nicole Bradfield and Robin Hoyle. The last year's event was probably the most helpful, informative, and friendly conference I've ever been to. So book a place now, ELN Connect conference. If you don't go, you're blowing it, and I can't really help you. And with that, I will hand over to Olivia.
Thanks very much, Leonard, and thanks everyone for joining us. I was hoping to be saying from a sunny Brighton, but it's actually very overcast and a bit grim down here. But no, that is not going to stop us having a very bright and hopefully useful and hopefully also interactive session this morning. We've got a kind of couple of polls to run through as we go through, but anytime anyone has any questions, just pop them up on chat, and Leonard will be hopefully on the standby to feed them through, and we can take them as we go. So just in terms of what we're discussing today, she says, getting her screen all synced up. We're going to start, I mean, the sort of first part of this presentation is, I guess, quite high level. A lot of it is around context setting. So looking at the world that we're all operating within and looking specifically at this topic of transformation. So some of the things that are driving transformations in business. We're going to look specifically or take a little bit of a dive around this topic of culture. So at Brightwave here, we've been doing a number of pieces of research over the last 6 months. One of them is around the theme of digital transformation, and we gained some insight into culture as a transformation accelerator, which we thought would be useful and interesting, hopefully, to share this morning. We're going to have a little look at tomorrow's learners and their mindset. So in relation to all those changes that are happening, you know, what's the impact on our learners? What kinds of new mindset, skills, behaviours do they need? And toward the tail end, we'll actually pick up looking at the case study that Leonard's just talked about that we're up for an award on, as an example of some of the ways that we here are looking at enabling both engagement and alignment to help our learners better come with us during times of change. So a bit about me. Leonard's already given a bit of an intro. I think the only thing I'd like to add to that, I always hold my hand up and say, I'm not a learning person in the sense that I'm not a learning and development practitioner. I come to learning from communications and more latterly from the emerging technologies sector. What I've discovered along the way actually is I am a learning person, because most of the projects I've been involved with that from my perspective have been the most interesting and delivered clients most benefit have been around a learning theme or actually had learning content. So I've been quite delighted coming into, looking at my colleague to the left, Rob, coming to learning and development and actually realising these worlds are becoming increasingly, I guess, blurry. And there are a lot of things I've learnt stepping into learning that from a communications perspective are fabulous, and things that the integrated communications industry can learn from. But I guess what I'm doing is bridging back the other way and taking some of the insights that I know about from being a communications practitioner into learning, and how we make that bridge work a bit better. So we wanted to kick off, oh my, we've got our next door room is very, very noisy. So forgive me if you're hearing any background noise. It probably does sound like there's a party starting next door. I think they're on a conference call, but the sound can runs the risk of coming through. So in terms of scene setting, we wanted to just set off with a little poll and ask you all where you think effective transformation comes from. Do you think it comes primarily out of the market in terms of what our clients are up to and their own sort of market trends and setting the pace there? Do you think it's driven primarily through technology or culture? The time is ticking now. You have, how long do they have, Leonard? How long are we going to give people?
Sorry, just give it a few more seconds and you can close it. Okay.
Will you let me know?
Yes. Okay. I'm ending it now. And,
all right.
The results are in.
Yay! We're all on the same page then. It is indeed culture. I mean, obviously the other two have a huge part to play, but more recently, the research that we've been exploring, I guess, provides those proof points for what we all probably at a gut instinct think or feel, that culture is this really important part of bringing people along. In a digital transformation space, I guess historically, these transformations have been looked at primarily through the lens of technology in response to market trends, and the culture piece is only being addressed at a kind of board level, I'd say within the last 5 years. So that's sort of the topic we're going to be exploring a bit together. So let's set a bit scene, in the immortal words of Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changing. I mean, this will be familiar to many of you, I'm sure. I always enjoy just seeing these things set out on a page, because for me, it helps really bring home the massive amount of change that we're all going through. So the fourth industrial revolution, so the so-called industry or IR4, along with digital 4.0, so the technologies that sit and wrap around these platforms, integrations, are making huge, huge changes in all of the businesses that most of us are either within or serve. I mean, for us here at Brightwave, I think the ones that we're most actively involved ourselves with are around augmentation, around big data, and cloud computing, which I guess underpins everything. But I'm sure in your industries and workplaces, you'll have your own view about which one of these is making the most impact. So I kind of was reflecting on this, because this is a visual that was shared to me by our data science colleagues in our parent company. And I've ordinarily used this as a future world of work slide. And as I was preparing the content for today, I thought, oh, how interesting. I'm actually retitling this as the world of work today, because over the last literally year, we've seen some of these things come on stream. We're certainly talking with clients around the impact of them, and from a learning and development perspective, whether it's the topic itself or whether it's the platform that you're using to be able to engage with learners. These are here. It's happening here and now. So I spent a bit of time keeping up with and trying to continue to educate myself on what's, where is all this change coming from? What are the key trends within it? If you don't follow already or know of, I would encourage you to find out about a report that comes out in June of each year. It's called the Internet Trends Report. It's written by a woman called Meeker. She is one of Silicon Valley's foremost sort of investment strategists. She's been producing this thing called the Internet Trends Report for 20 years now. And what it does is provide a massive, highly succinct overview of all of the trends that are happening within the online space. And I've taken out from this year's report a couple of graphs. And it's fair to say, I think learning has been a theme in the last sort of 2 to 3 years. It's sort of had fairly weighty sections. The things that I found really interesting about this, so two things: the amount of data, and some of this, we know instinctively that this is true. But actually, if you look at the amount of data being created on an annual basis, these zettabytes that are going higher and higher and higher. So this is the International Data Corporation's slide. What I find the most interesting about this graph to the left is not just the volumes, so this increasingly information-heavy world that we're all operating within. It's the amount that actually isn't structured. So when you look at the share of structured data going up, 13% last year leaves this massive amount of data that no one either knows about, knows what to do with, or that it's basically unstructured. And I think for me that highlights some of the stresses, strains, and problems that end up in the workplaces of our learners. And then the curve to the right, I liked this. It's just sort of very simple. I think it sums up exactly where we're at, the rate of change. So technologies are outstripping our ability to adapt. So human adaptability is slower than the rate of technological change. And what's really interesting is this little kind of red text that sits in the middle there. So the only way to close this gap, according to the Meeker report, is two things. So one, smarter regulation. So, that's nothing we can do anything about. But the second is faster learning. And that is absolutely our community's challenge to address. We'll all be familiar with, I guess, maturity curves, maturity indices. The one you're looking at is, of course, a Gartner one. This is a business intelligence maturity index from Gartner. What I find interesting about it, and these little yellow circles around it are mine, is how many, even when you're looking at a highly data-driven, business-driven maturity index, actually seeing now that the human factor is becoming a much more prevalent part of what leads to success. So right up at that top level of, when you're a mature organization, it's about having the right kinds of cultures, the right sort of people, making the right kinds of decisions. So the people piece is becoming, a much, much higher and acknowledged part of what it takes to respond to the challenge of not just immense amounts of data, but all of the new kinds of technologies that are making sense of it and indeed driving new products and services. So just to be really basic about it, because sometimes I think it's nice to just be really clear. This is the Olivia worldview. There is a need to close the gap on the left in order to make better use of the data on the right. And when I saw these graphs, and we were looking at this digital transformation piece of work, trying to work out, what is it we all need to do? What's the one thing? It seems to be closing that gap to make best use and leveraging all of that new value that comes out of the data that 4IR technologies provide. So I guess, enough on the techie stuff. What about skills? What about people? And one of the main, I think, benefits in a way of having the analysis at our fingertips, having a greater understanding of, what technology is up to, is that it's forced this question of, well, what, in a world of automation, in a world where, robots are increasingly able to make, bring massive impacts into our industries, also some massive benefits, what are the quintessential human skills that are going to be, always a human thing? PwC's CEO survey of 2017, I thought sort of hit the nail on the head, really, and they highlighted the following 5. So it's problem solving, it's leadership, it's adaptability, it's creativity, and it's innovation. And these, in a sense, are very different skills to be equipping people with. So as we go through this transformation, this process of more and more, the machines, in a sense, become better at doing X and Y and Z things, people need to also not only learn more about those new technologies, those new skills, but how can we help them become better creative innovators? How can we help them become better adaptable leaders? How can we help them become more adept problem solvers? So we did a little exercise. This was actually a client piece of work, but I'm sharing with you today because I thought it's just quite helpful to start thinking through these changes from the perspective of roles, people, individuals, teams. So we looked at 3 roles. The first, sort of an HR director, and started thinking through, you know, what are the kinds of new skills, knowledge and behaviour that these individuals will need. So around the skills side of things, that, you know, increasingly HR directors are going to have digital 4.0. They're going to need to be able to recruit and retain talent related to 4IR tech. They're also going to need a succession plan in quite a different way. So one of the big themes coming out of the research was around how to make sure that you have the right leadership in place at the time you're going to need it, given that the periods of change are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Around knowledge, being able to know enough about topics like automation, AI adoption, being able to work very adeptly with matrix and cross-function teams. Increasingly, the employee experience is becoming, you know, a really big part of the HR world. So making those bridges between what would formerly have been thought about more like a communications activity, but looking at the day-to-day actual working practice life of people within their organisations. On the behaviour piece, coaching, huge theme, and these individuals will be expected to not only expertly coach themselves, but be able to help others develop those practices within their own realms of work. They're going to need to live the purpose and values. I mean, gone is the day where what takes place within an organisation stays within an organisation. You can pretty well expect anything that's going on internally is going to be at some degree open to the outside world, and that puts extra pressure on people to really be living the company's purpose and values. And these are going to be the people responsible for closing that skills gap, for doing faster learning. One of the things the Meeker report pulls out is 3 things around learning, iteration and experimentation being really important. So we jumped sort of, I guess, to the early onboarding part and thought through, what about people coming into organisations anew? What about the apprentices of the world? Again, skills, digital, absolutely. Online research, you know, people coming into the world of work today are hugely skilled at being able to find out just about nearly anything they need online. And that's had a massive impact on the learning and development industries. To be very simple about it, I can look at YouTube and find an answer to that has become a standard in some places. STEAM foundations, so not just STEM, not just science, technology, engineering and maths, but the A for arts. So some really interesting work coming out of MIT at the moment around trying to encourage humanities skills and being able to bring in arts subjects so that people can understand topics like the ethics of bringing in AI, you know, how you can creatively problem solve around a scientific problem, but the arts, and being an arts practitioner, I guess I'm slightly biased here, gives you those skills. Increasingly, people are looking to things like degree apprenticeships. So, you know, not going through the university route, but attaining a degree as they work, looking and having the skills around emerging platforms, interdisciplinary collaboration. And on the behaviour side, you know, very proactive and extremely pragmatic as well as commercial. So this is the generation, many of her peers will probably be working in a gig economy. They're going to be really aware of the fact that the world of work is changing and that they're not just their role within it, but the wave they're riding. And an expectation for lifelong learning. So, you know, learning loops, no longer feeling that you're going to continue to, you know, discontinue your education, step into the world of work and then go from there, but indeed keep that learning all the way through. And then if we looked at, say, a technical role, engineering being a good one, because engineering is often where fourth industrial technologies are bearing at their most heavily. So the sort of skills that our young engineer will have, they'll be increasingly used to working within blended physical and digital environments. So within the sort of emerging technologies sector, we talk about the singularity. So the singularity being the point at which you can no longer distinguish between what is digital and what is physical. And if that sounds like a slightly mind-blowing thought, you know, we are probably 2 years away from a lot of that becoming quite mainstream. Critical thinking, so he's going to be a good critical thinker. He's going to be an expert collaborator. On the knowledge side, he's going to know a lot about digital 4.0 programs and interfaces. expect some degree of personal predictive technologies within the L&D blend, and have access to data to inform decision making. So already you can sort of see that the kind of blended learning that an individual like this engineer might need is quite different to what we might historically have thought about. He knows that engineers like him are very valuable, so he's going to be ambitious. You know, he's going to be knowing what he can get in the marketplace. He's going to challenge the status quo if there are things that maybe he's got better ideas, ways of doing things, and like our apprentice, have an expectation for not only lifelong learning, but he's going to be looking to that HR director and their teams for those coaching moments and being able to be coached in his role as well. So I hope you find that as sort of an interesting tiny little overview into how some of these things might manifest in the world of work. The P in transformation. Can anyone guess what it might be? It is indeed people. And I think this is, as we're going through this content, this is the theme. All of the code that you see to the left, actually, at the end of the day, it always has been, but actually, increasingly, it is about people. What's the hurry? So, we've talked about this bridging the skills gap. We've explored a little bit about, these changing roles. Sometimes it does feel like there's just a massive amount of pressure on everyone. And every now and then you sort of take a step back and go, what is the hurry? Well, I mean, there's a really, really good reason for this. We were doing a piece of research around, as I say, digital transformation. But the facts and figures around company longevity are startling. So when you look at the number of companies who have been recently listed, and then the firms going out of business, I think it's down to about, in some cases, sort of on average, between 2 to 5 years. So, big corporations know that this is literally a matter of life or death from the perspective of remaining in business. And to survive, you have to transform. Therein there is a slight, so that's one piece of research. The other bit that's, equally interesting, but also quite disturbing in a way, is that of those companies who are transforming, 50% of transformation initiatives actually fail. Like, not only just don't go well, I think the statistic around those that kind of don't go well is around 34%, but the number of actual failures is 50%. And the thing that is suggested, right across the board, is that shortcomings in organizational culture are actually one of the main barriers to making a successful transformation. So just for the context, that is where the pressure comes from. It's real. It's not just because everyone feels like putting us all under a huge amount of extra pressure and giving us a whole lot of new things to sort out in our day jobs. This is real market-driven stuff. So how do you do it? I think that's the question on everyone's lips at the moment. It's fine to say culture can help transformations, but what actually is it that is being spoken about here? So I guess in the past, when digital was coming into workplaces, it was looked at as an IT thing, or a team would take care of that. And what's increasingly being discovered that, of course, if you don't bring people with you, or indeed you don't let them know why or how they're expected to deal with these technologies or the process itself, it's not going to work. So leading players, Nordstrom, GE, people who've sort of been in this game for a long time, we now have the benefit of that experience. We can look to it and learn from it. And the takeout is that culture change is an accelerator for success. What's kind of meant by that is also interesting. So one of the words used to describe this process, I think in a Gartner 2019, was they talked about operationalizing culture. So this isn't the sort of fluffy stuff, although being a communicator, I would also argue that that's all purpose and values driven is important. This is about how you operationalize culture change, how you put it into practice in people's everyday work, and actually increasingly in the flow of their working life. And that is, I think, for the L&D, the biggest opportunity, as well as one of the biggest challenges. So we're going to take a step out now. I'm exploring content here that actually comes from our sister company, Blue Sky. So we work in partnership with them quite frequently. They are a people change company, and they talk about often change as coming as wearing one of three colours. So either it's the world is changing, and we're going to do a little poll here. We want to know, what do you consider is your main challenge? The world is changing. So it could be from technology to the environment, to politics, to where you shop, people's needs, values and behaviours, everything around us is changing. It could be that you're changing. Maybe you've got a new CEO, maybe you've got some new complex regulation, maybe there's a disruptive competitor, maybe there's a shift of power to foreign markets. These are the sorts of changes that companies are often grappling with. Or it could be the goal is changing. Maybe someone's news come in, maybe indeed you're massively successful, but you're wondering where to next. It's just the fact of having a new challenge every week. So if you could have a think, give us a clue about which one of these three colours best sums up your change challenge. Trying to think for myself which one mine would be.
Just going to give this, okay, most people have voted now, so I'm just going to end it.
Okay.
And
I'm curious. I think I'm on the world is changing.
We have a comment from the chat. Somebody said all of those.
Yeah. Yeah, the world is changing. Yep. I think I'm with you on that. That's the feeling that I have most days. In a positive way, I must say. I do. But then I get the benefit of being able to, think about a lot of it on a day-by-day basis as well.
Okay, closing that now.
Yeah. So Blue Sky also talk about, thanks very much for your input. I'm always curious and quite fascinated by how people feel this impacts on them. So Blue Sky also talk about change as creating what they call three climates, surviving, striving and thriving. So in the surviving space, when they're working with companies who would categorize themselves as that, it's things like their employee engagement's under threat, sales and customer experience isn't quite good, you're not quite where you want to be. When you're striving, you're demonstrating, pockets of brilliance, but it's the struggle to turn it into consistent results. And I think that's probably a challenge most of us can relate to. And in thriving, which is clearly where we all want to be for as much of the time as possible, you're achieving amazing things. But even, Blue Sky's insight is that even for companies who consider themselves to be thriving, it's about how you prioritize what's coming next without burning people out. So I guess the takeout there is no matter which one you feel like you occupy, change is still constantly sort of nipping at your heels, and that there isn't a kind of end destination. There's no sort of place, no tree under which you can lay your head and have a rest. Sorry about that, but we've all got to keep going. And what Blue Sky have is they have a thing called the culture code. So this is the tool that they use when they're going into businesses in order to look at people change. We don't have the opportunity to deep dive into all of them today. There are 12, and they stack up against conversation, climate and clarity. The one I want to look at this morning is the engage piece. So engaging people, making sure that you have people, understanding your message and inspiring them, because I think engagement is the bit that is the key into unlocking the culture and the sort of operationalization of change. And this is a subject very much close to my heart, coming out of communications. Just to sort of set the scene here, these were some research we did around for a client event, client event we ran in our studio. This figure I find really quite shocking. So this is Gallup. So they've got about 30 years research under their belts. They've got sort of a base of 30 million employees. 87% of employees worldwide consider themselves to be not engaged at work. I can't, every time I come across this, I still can't quite believe it, but that's what the data says. But then By contrast with that statistic, you know, if you do have a highly engaged workforce, the research also suggests that workforces with high engagement outperform their peers by 147% in earnings per share. So looking at the difference between those, you know, there is, I guess, a dividend to be leveraged from engagement when we can get it right. And some of the benefits, so this is a UK consortium called Engage for Success. They got themselves quite obsessed with, in a good way, with how do you know? So, you know, how do you prove that engagement makes a difference? What's the ROI on engagement? So they've done surveys going back since, I think, 2012, they first got together. And here are some of the proof points. So with an A on Hewitt, $70,000 more sold on average per year. They analysed 47 Serco contracts and found that there was a 20% lower staff turnover and a 25% lower absence rate in stores where they had highly engaged employees within M&S. So, you know, we do have the proof points. We have the statistics to prove it. It counts. But how do people actually engage? You know, what is it that they're doing? What do we mean when we talk about engagement? You know, the science of behaviour change tells us really clearly that how people feel about a topic is going to not only influence their engagement, but eventually how they go on to learn. So just taking hypothetically a topic, I've said, how do you feel about our AI strategy? Because that's a transformation that many of our businesses or our client businesses will be going through. And then if you sort of think about how that could stack up, you get asked about, how do I feel about our AI strategy? Well, some people are going to be scared. It's not a topic I know anything about. And what happens when people are scared is they switch off.
Sorry, I just have to note, Olivia, that I wrote, how do you feel about your transformation process? That was it.
Oh, yes. Sorry. We tweaked this. My apologies, Leonard. So, yeah, transformation process. I sort of felt that was maybe a little bit too vague. When
yes. Yeah.
An apology on my part to you. Now, it's not suggesting that these were my words originally. Bored. So, you know, you'll always find people who maybe they don't understand enough about it to get engaged with it, but they're going to want to get on with their real work. Stressed, another day, another strategy, you know, so much change. It's just hard to keep up. It makes people stressed. And then curious, you know, I saw something the other day that made me think differently. So I'm curious to know how you all feel about the changes that are going on in your place of work, or maybe you could think about this through the perspective of clients that you work with. You know, how are people generally feeling when you're engaging with them? Ah, wow. I actually really want to go out for a party with all of you lot where we'd have a great time together, because curiosity is definitely the attribute that is going to be most helpful when dealing with change. I mean, Rob and I were having this conversation earlier. We sort of thought, actually, you know, being scared or stressed is clearly they're more difficult emotions to work with, but working with emotion, actually, that can also give you a clue as to what we might need to do in order to, you know, help people maybe get over some of those barriers. I'm not quite sure if everyone's feeling bored, whether there's a lot you can do, you know. Yeah. But curiosity didn't kill the cat. Curiosity is great for engaging people and bringing people with us on this change. So in terms of which we wouldn't want, I mean, we've had a little explore about that. I think probably it's only really bored. Having people who are bored is, you know, in a sense, a harder thing to do in terms of engagement than it is to deal with some of these options. There's another couple of things that, you know, as useful as change practitioners, as an L&D, as we try to help our colleagues and our clients deal with learning to transform. And that's that our kind of brains are hardwired really to do two things. So we only pay attention to things we care about. If someone doesn't care about a topic, the chances of being able to get them involved is very slim. And secondly, we process visual information much more quickly than words. I'm sure there are lots of people on the webinar who are visual designers or who have a bent for the visual. Indeed, I guess increasingly all of our worlds involve so much more visual information than anything else. And for those of you, we are going to, by the way, share a referenced copy of this presentation for anyone who's interested. But just as we go along, I've given you there the reference for a very, very useful piece of research from MIT, detecting meaning, and it will give you all the science you ever need when people ask the question, why is it that a picture works better than text in some instances? No disrespect or indeed slight intended to any people who may be perhaps script writers or wordsmiths. I consider you family. So creating connections where it counts. Part of the trick with all of this, I guess, is to figure out where you need to have leverage and at what points you're going to get the most benefit from making, high empathy connections with our learners. And in terms of why learning helps engagement, I mean, people will be, I'm sure, familiar with Dan Pink's autonomy, mastery, purpose. And in terms of the jobs you love versus the jobs you don't so like. Learning and development has a massive role to play in terms of helping people feel in control of their work, knowledgeable about it, to help them feel like they're using their full potential and they're really growing. Even if this topic's difficult, it's tough to come to terms with. If you're enthused and curious about wanting to do it and you feel like you have an opportunity to gain that mastery, you're going to have a much better time. And then purpose, so feeling like your work matters and actually makes an impact. And I would argue that is where our culture piece plays most strongly. So engagement and learning, we at Brightwave consider, and I'm sure many of you would agree with this, as engagement is a precondition for effective learning. All of the science backs that up. And I think we sort of all instinctively would feel that engagement in terms of learning topics that are new, and bearing in mind topics of the fourth industrial revolution are complicated. This isn't easy stuff. But if we can encourage our learners to achieve that curious mindset and provide them with the tools, we stand a much better chance at closing that gap. And one of the things that we are quite keen to do is, and I guess part of particularly the latter part of this presentation is really around being able to take skills or take knowledge from other domains, in this case the world of communications and integrated communications, and joining these two things up, because at the end of the day we're all competing for the time and attention of the same people. No matter what we create, rich immersive content is only as impactful as the strategy around it. So also joining up that journey between whether it's learning and communications, whether it's IT and HR, whether it's L&D and strategy, making connections at a kind of organizational level is going to help our learners ultimately tackle the dreaded forgetting curve. It's a bit of a jump, isn't it, really, from a forgetting curve to a customer journey. So I'm sharing this with you just to, we've done a lot of talking around the houses, we've done a lot of scene setting. Let's get tactical and quite practical as well. How do you make this work in practice? So one of the things we've been looking at, and this was a response to a client brief. So they wanted a learning campaign. One of the things that we've been looking at is how do you sustain engagement over time? How do you take topics which are challenging with content that is maybe too much to put into a piece of learning wholesale? You have to look for touch points, other places that people can go to be able to get that, that messaging, to get those tools. And so we've been looking to, you'll be familiar with this, I'm sure, sort of, we've made it into a learner journey, but this curve is ordinarily fashioned as a customer journey. So it's taking people from, seeing the ad to popping the thing in the shopping carpet and then writing a nice review. But when translated into a learning context, we've been finding this tool really useful, just in terms of being able to think through, the stages that we're ordinarily wanting to take learners. So from awareness right through to being enabled through the learning, through the new skills, through the behaviours that it is our job to deliver, into active advocates. So at the tail end of it, and actually we've started to think about this more like a circle. So coming full circle and then being able to go out and advocate, go out and coach, go out and make themselves available to be able to seed, that new knowledge elsewhere. And along the bottom, you'll see this sort of diagnostic. So it being really important that no matter how small you're looking, whether it's a tiny little campaign that's running for a month to help people deal with a new IT security policy, for example, to an 18-month campaign that's about getting people engaged with an AI strategy. Having some form of a place where you can take measurement, get feedback, adapt, and then report a future state is just becoming increasingly, more important. And I think for me, it's this bottom bit that when people talk about operationalizing culture, that's not what they mean, but at the end of the day, when you're trying to describe it, having those measures is so important. Another just a little insight along the way. So I spend quite a lot of time looking at tools that come out of the integrated communications industries and then applying them into a learning context. And one of them, the most helpful little insights that I came across was sort of a mental shift thing. And they were saying, don't think about measurement and evaluation as being sort of information that you're getting from learners. Think about the measurement as being feedback that you can then respond to and adapt your content accordingly. So they were talking about it in the context of PR campaigning. But for me, that was a really just a useful little nugget to think about when putting together ways to be able to measure change. I've spent quite a lot of time over the last 6 months looking quite specifically at measurement, so measurement and evaluation, and the topic of behaviour change. So it's a topic that crops up a lot. I would probably suggest most of you at some point along the line, someone said, well, how do we know that we're making a difference? How do we know that what we're doing works? And more, the desire to have tangible behavioural proof points is important. Increasingly on these big transformation journeys where you literally, it is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of actually people can either do this skill, demonstrate this behaviour, or, to be long and short about it, we stand the risk of not being around in order to compete. The short version is there isn't a silver bullet for any of this. I mean, and I've spent literally the better part of the last 6 months doing quite a lot of digging around, but there is some very good science. And if for those of you who aren't aware, and for those of you who are aware and who have working insight into using the tool, I'd be very interested to hear from you. So what you see on the right is a tool developed by the University College of London. It's called the Behaviour Change Wheel. If you type into Google, or you can wait until receive a referenced version of this report. There is a book that documents all of this. But what the Behaviour Change Wheel is a way of contextualizing all of the different, pressures as well as opportunities that we have to be able to help people not only make behavioural change, but for us to be able to measure it. And the sort of COM-B model, which you may be familiar with, so this capability, opportunity, and motivation that drives behaviour comes out of the behaviour change wheel with the little nudges. I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure that when Tony Blair started first talking about nudges, it came out of this work, and I have a feeling that the word nudge as used in L&D is referenced from this body of research from UCL as well. So in terms of changing people's behaviour, if you follow the COM-B model, we at Brightwave use it. This is the model that we run with when we're thinking about working, looking for behaviour change. Again, some of the things that we've spoken about already, that we are only hardwired to pay attention to things, emotion being key, plays into this. The fact that we're storytelling creatures, so we need to see role models of change. We need to tell stories and do stories, as Blue Sky would say, across the business. And appeal to people's interests, what's in it for me, and address the question, why should I change? So Kevin Reed, Bell Pottinger, so this is the world of PR. A lot of the insight and research that I've found most helpful in answering this measurement, evaluation, behaviour change piece comes out of the PR industries. Kevin Reed has this lovely and quite brutal expression: if you're failing to plan, you're planning to fail. And I think there is a lot of truth to this. We're not going to go into this in too much detail. And in fact, if Rob can you give me a thumbs up on, are we all right on time? I've got on time? Cool. So what you're seeing here is a tool that comes out of PR. It's called the AMEC. So AMEC are the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. If anyone's involved in evaluation and measurement and you don't know about this organisation, please do go and have a look. So they have taken the behaviour change wheel and they have created a version of it which is, I guess, more closely aligned to what we do within L&D. So just to step back very briefly, the thing I found that I struggled with applying the behaviour change wheel to learning contexts is that behaviour change is usually around influencing things that L&D has no real say over. So it's around policy, it's around kind of regulation, it's around bigger and broader contextual scene setting things that in the space of my daily work, I can't really affect that. I can design a program to respond to it, but it's not a lever I can use to actually design a program with that in mind. When I first encountered this wheel, I was like, oh, this is amazing, because what they've done in AMEC is take the same principles from the behaviour change wheel, but apply them into contexts that are much closer to L&D. So although it's a tool that comes out of the communications industries, if you go on and start having a look, you'll find, I'm sure, some things that ring a bell. So things like they have a really great taxonomy. So I found this tool very helpful in thinking about even sense checking myself on evaluation. So, am I designing activities that, when I plan this activity, what's the output and how can I think about that as being different from the outtake? So i.e. that's what an audience actually takes out of your communication, not what you put out there, as different from an outcome. So the effect, so what is someone going to do that's different based on the information they've received, as different again from an impact. What is the net result of people doing things differently? So in a context of operationalizing culture change and being able to deliver metrics and a succinct report around what change has happened, these sorts of tools I am finding very, very helpful indeed. And I'd be very interested to hear after this webinar if any of you are using tools like this or similar or have others. I don't know, maybe we could set up a little working group. It would be interesting. I would like to connect with other people who are thinking about and exploring how to do this. This is to make you all feel a lot better, because after I'd spent about 4 months delving through this, and as my head was going, oh my goodness, I don't think I can take much more. Someone just said, and I think it was an AMEC person, I think it was actually someone like the professor of communication from, Australia, and there are a whole lot of people out there working full time on proving ROI, and they struggle with delivering meaningful metrics. So it isn't easy, and you shouldn't be under any illusion that someone out there is doing all of this amazingly well, and I'm just struggling because I can't quite work out. It isn't easy, but you have to start somewhere, and that is, I think, I found that really helpful because it's stopped me getting blocked from making the steps I know I can take. So to look at some enablers for engagement and alignment, this is just wanting to put some of the work that we've been doing and exploring out there. And we'll go through this quite quickly, but clearly if anyone has any questions, wants more information, you know where to find us. As Rob said, we'll make this all available to you as a referenced copy of this deck afterwards for anyone who wants it. Don't be alarmed. We're not going to come and pry about tax. We have been, this is the piece of work that Leonard mentioned at the tail end. So we have completed a piece of work for HM Revenue and Customs. The topic is very interesting and quite pertinent to bringing people with you during times of change because it concerns Brexit. So, and what was sort of interesting about it is that this becomes a transformation story because it's partly about a cultural change, bringing organisations who previously have not been working together at all, together to become a sort of new organisation. And then on the other hand, you know, dealing with transformation, a political transformation, at least the intent of a political transformation, with new requirements that come with it. So this was we started this project, I think, in January of 2019. At that stage, we had a hard deadline of 29th of March. We were going to be exiting the European Union on the 29th of March. And the problem for HMRC was that effectively there are a whole lot of new customs declarations that people need to fill in, but no one really knows how to do it. It involved sort of a whole 50 plus extra boxes of filling in forms, and a huge number of learners, people who currently were not involved in that process, needed to be upskilled. So the organisations we were working with, this was 5 of them. So the Institute of Export, Make UK, who are the manufacturers, main kind of manufacturers body, the British Chamber of Commerce, an organisation called Strong and Heard, who deliver import and export services, and BIFA, who are the British International Freight Association. So these 5 organisations with HMRC as a client had this massive challenge to try to get training materials out to learners who could come from, you know, any number of different backgrounds. They might be sort of sole traders, they might be already employed within an organisation but not be aware that they might need to do something differently. They might be aware that they needed to do something differently but not know what it was. So a very a kind of wide remit and a very short period of time. So we looked and delivered a blended solution. This ended up being 11 modules with 3 and 5 hour versions. They were all partner branded. So one of the requirements of this brief was that we couldn't be seen to be favouring any one of the partners. It needed to be a sort of neutral delivery of content that people could then be free to work with as they chose fit. It combined face-to-face training as well as digital, a number of virtual classrooms as well as online digital learning, so 3 by 90 minutes. And we had, so Tesla is our in-house LMS, so we ran 3 branded versions of that to service 3 of the partners, and the other 2 had their own. And alongside of it, and this was the role I played within this piece of work, was looking at creating campaign collateral, dedicated websites and PR, social messaging and animations to support making sure that as many people as possible knew that there was this training available, and HMRC were providing some grants and some funding to make sure that anyone who needed to upskill could do so without incurring cost to their own organisations. So we engaged the market. This was the marketing communications plan that we put forward, looking at sort of a number of tranches of content across actually throughout the whole of this year. So looking at things like the branded dedicated site and a series of email campaigns, and then we were also responsible for some press release content, and then social assets that partner agencies were free to be able to distribute as they saw fit. The learning content itself, either on Tesla or their own elements. So this is some of the content that circulated around, some of the press releases. On the left is the site that we created in order to be able to start promoting the training. We did a series of social sort of videos and blogs. We provided the content, and it was up to the partners to be able to take that content and do what they wanted to do with it. So it was sort of quite a complex but complementary set of channels that we could work with. And the story so far, I mean, clearly this story is not over yet, but the story so far, we've had sort of 8,400 unique page views on our dedicated site. This was all delivered and so developed and delivered within that 3-month period from January through until the end of March. We've had 2,600 enrolments so far. We've had a 94% postcode coverage, so that was far exceeding the target. And I think what's interesting about that is in terms of bringing together some of the tools that the world of integrated communications uses as a default. So that communications planning, that being able to put things out onto channels, that thinking ahead about, you know, where does this need to go and who needs to access it, I think made a great contribution to being able to help make sure that as many people around the UK could find out about this as possible. And we had an incredibly positive set of feedback that's come back, which, you know, given the topic, this is customs declarations. It's not, there's nothing, how should we say, overtly fair to say, interesting. I mean, maybe I disagree. Maybe there are people out there who are customs agents, and I wouldn't want to put a downer on it, but it's not learning about contemporary art. So one of the things, and we're nearing the end now of this presentation, we're looking at, and I think the HMRC is been the start point for us of just thinking about planning, delivering, learning in a slightly different way, is around tools. So all of the tools that we have at our disposal to be able to make learning that is great, that is engaging, but increasingly can operate and live across multiple channels. So we are in the process of making a methodology that sits behind a set of transformation tools that we can deploy right across a blend, and also back the other way when clients are asking us more specifically for things that might be maybe more communications focused, where is the learning element within that. And just to end with, so this is going back to our what's known here as the snake, our learner journey. So this is the sort of way that we're taking these insights and starting to put them into practice. So this is what you're seeing here is developing a response to a client that had a need to do digital transformation, quite a large organization. It was a banking organization. They weren't very digital. And what they were asking us was, how can we get people engaged with what this change means for our organization at an individual and team level? So we took the snake. We thought about, we were working in partnership with a sister company, G2G3, who do day-long simulations. So they create really engaging day-long versions of agile, DevOps, sort of IT-based digital transformation processes. And we thought quite succinctly about how would we work in partnership with them for this client to take people through that journey of awareness through to being active advocates for this change. So some of the things we looked at, things like teaser films. We had actually the idea of a tracker. So we were going to build an application that would enable this organization to be able to track the change over time, that would take snapshots and also be able to give nudges and help people sort of share the learning as they went through. One of the requirements of this client was, well, that's all good and well, tell us what you can do today, but can you think forward and think in, 12, 18 months, where would we be? So we gave some thought to, not only how could we take the tools we have, apply them to this client brief in the here and now, but where could we go? What sorts of small changes or indeed big changes might we start thinking about at the outset in order to develop for this client a much smarter, more holistic, and they were interested in bringing data in more and more to help the organization evolve. So we started thinking about where the data would fit, the idea of introducing a little kind of AI flywheel quite early on so that we could take different profiles from within the organization, that DevOps content could be made in a much more tailored way, and that we would also look at taking that data and benchmarking it externally. So not only how is everyone doing within your organization, but actually where are others at and how are you doing in relation to that. And we got to the end, well, as you'll see here, in our end state, our snake actually became a wheel. So we started to think and see that as you start being able to take data, allow data to fuel and shape what it is that you're delivering back to learning communities, and indeed as those learning communities are able to then engage more actively and fully, it starts to become a lovely little transformation flywheel. So by being able to create an iterative process of continual development, it ends up becoming a virtuous circle. A tiny end thought for you all, Peter Drucker. One of the frustrations I have in my job is often the world of communications. And from what I've seen within learning, I think it's probably even more so. The topics we're tasked to address are often seen as soft. They're not kind of hard business related. They're sometimes considered to be a bit optional. This idea around the P in transformation, you know, the people that ultimately deliver this change. What I think it's done is massively change that preconception, because it's acknowledged now that culture is important. Culture is actually essential to make any of this work, but still, you still need to be able to measure it. So Mr. Drucker, I think his insight serves us well. What gets measured gets managed. And I wanted to leave you all with a little, again, a small insight. These aren't big insights, but I hope they'll be useful ones. Customer experience. So I come out of the world of communications, so it's logical that in a way that would be my first touch points. But I would, if you are not familiar with or don't often touch and use the tools of marketing and communications, I would encourage you to just go out and have a look. So what you're seeing here is a graphic from IBM Watson's Marketplace. So IBM, you all know who they are and what they do. Where they've been particularly, I think, clever is in making their AI accessible to all sorts of different vendors. I'm using this as an example for the types of very detailed metrics that come off the back of, this is a marketplace, it's a customer experience platform. If you compare the types of analytics that come out of the world of Marcoms to learning, I think you start to see some quite, there is a lot of difference. And I think we can learn and indeed accelerate and use some of these tools because they're out there, right? These are tools that are at our disposal. And some of it is around taking the thinking from those tools and applying it into a learning and development context. And what I also think is helpful for the customer from a customer experience perspective is that CX platforms are absolutely expert at taking people from one place and getting them to somewhere else. I mean, in this case, it's discovery through to acquiring as in buying, and then using and advocating. In this case, it's out on social media. But if you took the same principles and then applied it to an internal L&D, you'll find that those changes can be highly applicable and provide you with some tools. So in summary, in terms of learning to transform and bringing people with you during this massive times and change, there's never been a time where the landscape is more open. There's never been a time where there are more tools at our disposal. That creates challenges. It creates challenges in terms of which one should I use, for what purpose, how do I get it right? But sort of remembering, if you keep the P, the people bit in any transformation and put culture first, you'll be starting from a really great place. We've dealt with, I think, some polling. We've done some polling. If anyone has any questions, do let us know. I think we'll stay on the line for a while. We're doing one of our studio sessions. We run sort of quarterly sessions at our head office studio up in London. We're doing one on the 24th of October where we're taking some of these themes under the banner of re-energizing workplace. So looking at some of the tools, looking at some of the themes, and they're really great sessions. If anyone wants to come along, bring your questions, bring your expertise, you'd be more than welcome. And if anyone wants a referenced copy of this presentation, then you can get in touch with us afterwards as well. We have that, on standby and ready to send out. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended this today. I hope you found it all useful. I would be very interested in talking with anyone out there who's a fellow behaviour change aficionado, share some practice and share some thoughts. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Olivia, for your very, very interesting presentation today. And thank you, everyone, for all the interesting comments and questions. I am just going to quickly share the ELN website just so everyone can see it. It's very easy to find. It's the elearningnetwork.org. And if you look down here, we have your event, Olivia. And then for those who are in Leeds, we have a social coming up in October. And as I mentioned, the ELN Connect 2019 event, creating a culture of curious learners. So again, thank you for a really great presentation, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at either ELN Connect or in the studio on the 24th.